Hi everyone. After I finished recording this episode for you, I noticed that I forgot to plug in my microphone, and the audio was recorded using the microphone of my laptop. Therefore, it's pretty bad. However, as it already, I think, was the third attempt of recording this video for me, where I basically had to rewrite the code from the scratch, I do not really have more mental strength to record it for the next time. Therefore, I can just say sorry and hope that you can understand and you can still follow along. The audio will be back to the normal standards in the next episodes.
Hi everyone. In this video, we will implement a login functionality to our application. So in the previous video, we have added a feature that our users can now register. So in this video, we'll now use the registration functionality and use the users that now we can create. And we will allow the user to log in into our application so that they can only see their to-dos, and then our application will be possible to use by multiple users at the same time, and every user will only have access to their to-dos. So first thing we need to do, let's go to our users routes. And here we have the login routes. So this is all fine. This is the get route. So basically, when somebody will go to /user/login, they will this will answer the request. So here, the only thing we need to do is we'll also have, as we do on the registration form, form errors. So here, what we will say is that either the user with a given username does not exist or the password was incorrect. But if somebody just goes there for the first time and it's not getting an answer where they already submitted a form, which will be from this route. So here we just want to create this without any errors. Now here, let's work on the post route. This will actually be a little bit more complex. So first off, what we need to do is we need to make this asynchronous. We'll query the database here. And what we do is we start the form errors object. And we initialize our response because we'll be going directly to the database. And our response will be await client.query. And what we want to await here is we want to select ID and password from users, where username equals $$1. And the $sign will be a request.body.username.trim. So there will be a form that will have a username field and that the users will submit if they want to access anything here. Now let's cut the error also, as always. For now we do just an error. So if we already had a way for to communicate with our users, so if you really want to add it, maybe this will be something we'll do in the next videos, or maybe this is something that you can do on your own. You should look up something called Flash, and there's a Flash package that allows you to do exactly this. I believe it should work with our implementation of the session, although there may be some differences that you'll have to create. So basically, if there is a problem, for example, right here that the database is not available, what we need to do is we want to redirect our user back to our login route. This would make sense if we had the possibility to display them some kind of error, right? That the database or there was just an error, please try again later, something like this. Okay. However, now if the username submitted by the user was correct, we have a user here. So we have at least the data for the user. So now let's define an error that we will display, and the error will just say user with this username does not exist, or the password is incorrect. And the reason I'm actually combining both of the errors into one is that we don't want to let our user know if they found a user with this username and they just inserted their own password, or if a user with this username doesn't really exist, because this makes life easier for the malicious users of our application. General error, because now not only they need to guess the password, but they also need to guess the username. So let's start our validation of this form. So first off, if the response.row count is equal strictly to 0, what we want to do is we want to say form errors dot general error. I will create a general error key for this error is equal to our general error message. Maybe call it like this, general error message. Okay, and here we want to return a response. We want to render the login template that we will soon create. I think not template but a view. We already have it, but it currently does not really include anything other than just a login word. Okay, and here we want to submit our form errors, and we want to save form errors. Okay, this is good. Let's continue. So what we need to do next is, if this is true, this means that we have selected a user. So we can say const existing user is equal to response.rows.0. So here, if you remember, the response object has a rows key, and we want to select the first item on this array, on the rows array. If there are more, this is not possible because we have the constraint that our usernames have to be unique. Okay, and now we define a compare. So what we need to do is we need to compare the password that we have got from the database, which is hashed password, to the not hashed password which our user has submitted. So what we need to do is we say await decrypt dot, and we use the compare method. Let's say if this was already, yes, this was already here imported, or the Visual Studio Code has imported it for us. So now here we insert the request.body.password, so the raw password. And here, as we can see by this little tool, in this little tooltip, we need to place our encrypted string, and our encrypted string is in our existing user.password. Okay, so now this will be either true or false. So if the compare is false, what we want to do is we want to do exactly the same thing we have done here. So we want to append the error. We want the error once again to be the same, no matter, here you can see it, no matter if the user doesn't exist, or if the password is incorrect, we want to display the same error message. Okay, and now what we need to do is here we need to authenticate the session. So in other words, we want to create a functionality or add a functionality to our application so that we know that the user that has just logged in can now access our application without the need to log in once again. Because if we didn't do it, the user would be forced to basically log in on every request they make, which is not the best user experience. So for now, let's leave it just as a comment. We'll come back to it after we implement the Authenticate Session functionality. So we want to say response.redirect and then to a successful login. Okay, let's move to our Authenticate Session functionality.
But before we do so, let's adjust our database model. So here we want to create a user ID that will be of a varchar type. So in the ddl.sql and then in the sessions.sql, we also want to create a user ID that will want to have a type varchar. What you also might want to create is you might want to create this grants.sql file. So if you care about deploying this application, you should create the following file, which grants the select, update, delete, and insert privileges on our database tables to our app_rw user. And this is what my application is using on production to access the production version of the database. And you just execute this as you would the other files. And here, just after we made the changes, let's execute them. Here, as you can see, I already executed them as I was testing it beforehand. So let's say ddl.sql, because this is what I changed. And now the new columns should be added, should be created, and we can move on.
So Authenticate Session functionality will create in our, not the test file, but here in the session file. Okay, let's move it right here. And let's create an asynchronous function, because we'll once again query the database. That will be called Authenticate Session. That will take a user ID as a parameter. And here what we do. So first off, let's check if we, because this once again will be used on our request object. So here, if we on the request object that we'll call this function on, we don't have the session, which should have already been added. Well, the user made a request to this, for example, /user/register route. What we want to say is we want to just return console.error that a session is required for session authentication. Okay, so this is it for our check, for our guard clause, and now we want to query the database. So we want to await client.query. We want to update sessions. We want to set user_ID equals $1, where ID equals $2. And the $1 will be our user ID. So basically, where our user ID, we want to set our user ID to the user ID of the current user. And what we want to do is we want to look up where the session is equal to the current session and the ID of this session. Okay, and then we want to catch. Whoops. We want to catch, and if something goes wrong, we want to console error it, and then do not do anything else, or we can actually maybe, yeah, so here we don't want to really do anything else. And then we want to do this .session.user_ID equals user ID. Okay, and maybe here we can define a response object. We can set the response object to the response from this database query. And here we can return this response object. And we can add this function to our experts so that we'll be able to import this function in our users file. So now let's go up here. Let's import the function. So we say const named import authenticate session equals require, and we need to go up one folder to get out of the routes folder and to a session file. Let's mouse over it. Yeah, okay, it's been found. This is good. So now here we said that we need to authenticate this session. So let's do it. As you remember, we created this as an asynchronous function. Therefore, we need to await it, and we need to authenticate session call, and we want to call it on the request object so that the request object becomes this, and we want to say existing user.id. So basically, here is how you use the call method. Here you place the object that is supposed to become this, and here later on you place the parameters. And if you remember, let's do the resp here. Yeah, we have. Okay, so let's define not a let, but a const. So const update response, because there we made an update, and basically, so here if update response.row count is equal to 0. What we want to do is we want to return response.redirect /user/login. Okay, so here basically if something went wrong, we want to redirect session not found for session authentication. And of course, we need to place it on top of the return. Okay, so here just if something went wrong, we are sort of prepared for that. We handle that, although it should not here. Okay, so here we have the authenticate session call. That's good. And now what we still should do is now we have added on the backend at the very least a possibility for our users to log in. Therefore, we should also add a possibility for them to log out. And logging out, this basically means either deleting, or in our case, what we'll do is we'll update the session token not to be valid anymore. So let's create here a logout route. So this will be /user/logout. This will be an asynchronous function. oops, comma instead of a dot, request response. And here what we want to do is we want to try, and we want to await client query, and we want to update sessions. We want to set our valid to of our session to now, and here I just because I like Postgres, I handle this in Postgres. We could also generate this timestamp in JavaScript. I do interval 5 seconds. And then here we are getting into things that are not very much generic. So if you wanted to switch the database to a different one, or maybe you're using a different database for this tutorials, you would have it a little bit different. I don't know, if I remember correctly, on DB2 we would just say -5 seconds. But on different DBMSs this is different. And now what we want to do is we want to say where ID equals $1 and user underscore ID equals $2. So here we want to say request session.id for the session ID and request.session.user ID for our user ID. And let's quickly check if I didn't remember if we did that after we write our catch block. So here, as always, we will console the error, and we will response.redirect to /todos in case something went wrong. Okay, here let's quickly go back to our session, and yeah, exactly here, this part, right? So after we authenticate the session, we assign to our session object that is on our request object a user ID. So basically the ID of the user that is currently logged in. And this is how we remember it. This is how we pass it to different. Pass it to different routes. Let's finish here. Response.redirect /user/login. Okay, so now we have our login and logout functionalities on the backend at the very least. Let's now work on the front end. So the front end. This is our view. Let's go to our register view. Let's copy everything and let's paste it here. What we want to change is we want to change the title. We want to remove the repeat password, because if you log in, you usually insert the password there only once. We want to change the text on the button to a login. Here we want to say don't have an account. Sign up here. And we want the link to be to the register route. Okay, that's good. And now our username will no longer have an error text, because if you remember, we are currently displaying only one type of error to all our errors. Let's see, general error here, and also right here. Okay, that should be it. Let's quickly go over it, check if we did not miss anything. And here we also need to, so if there is an error, we want to make both the username and the password boxes red, but we want to display the error only underneath the password input field. Okay, that should be good, but no better way to check it. Then let's start our application. Let's see how it works. To start the application, let's go into the app folder. Let's say npm run the start. Our application has started without any errors. That's good. I will currently open a browser and let's take a look how it looks. There's our application. It's looking good. We are currently at our todos route. So let's go to /user/login, and we have our login route. And what you might be a little bit curious about, right, is because currently we have implemented our login functionality, but we are still accessing the todos route without any issues, right? So we are going to /todos and it's not forcing us to log in, and we need to now implement this functionality. But before we do that, let's maybe quickly check if our user/login actually works. Oops, daisies. Okay, so let's here /test. This is the test user created some time ago. Let's search login. Oops, where are we at the register route? let's take a short look here, what's happening here, because we were redirected to a /user/register route. And yes, exactly. The issue is that here in the login problem, we did not change the action. So you might want to be really careful with how you handle this, because we have sent this form to our register route. So let's once again go to login. Let's say test, at least we know that the user exists. And let's log in. And we get an error that the session has not been found for session authentication. Okay, let's explore this error a little bit. And the issue of this error is actually our session mechanism that we implemented last time, is that currently it doesn't really handle well cases where it has to issue a new session ID. Because if you take a look here, so basically here, if our session doesn't exist or the cookie doesn't exist, what we do is we issue a new session ID, and we don't assign it to, so we don't assign the session to our request object, right? Because we will only assign it the second time we make a request. So the first time we make a request, this doesn't work because we just issue the cookie and we insert it to the database. But we do not currently handle cases that if in the first request somebody logs in, we do not pass the session to him. So here, let's do something like, let's set this return of this function to an issue session ID, and let's go to the definition of this function, and let's currently return here the session object. So what we need to do is we need to return, let's create an object that will have an ID of a session ID. Session ID we have in this function here. We are using this to create a cookie, for example. And let's set the valid underscore to current time. So this will be the same. So basically, we not only inserted the session to the database so that it will be looked up with the second request, but we also set it on the current request. And now let's check if after we changed and saved that, if we go ahead here and log in with a test, and we say login, we are logged in. That's good. Okay. Here you can see, by the way, that I have used a very serious debugging tools, which is just logging the problems that we have currently. Let's remove this, of course, and let's save the application. Okay, so now we are logged in. However, what you can currently still see is if I just went without logging here to the /todos route, we will still get here. So even though we have implemented now the login functionality, this doesn't really do anything. Not only it still does show the same todos for everyone, but I was not forced to log in. So let's first work on the second issue. Basically, we want to make a functionality for us that allows us to protect certain routes. So we want to ensure that a user is logged in if they are on a certain route. So let's do this currently. Let's go into our app folder here. Let's create a new file. Let's call it auth.js. And here we want to implement two functions. The first function is we want to implement a check if a user is authenticated. So we want to implement check authenticated. This doesn't really take any parameters, and it will return a middleware function. So we will use this in the stack for particular routes. That will then take or will enforce that a user is registered. So first off, let's create an if statement if we do not have a session. And you've seen that creating this if statement helped us to investigate. Let's move this to a new line. Helped us to investigate the last error that we had. So let's say console.error and request that session is required before checking authentication. In case this goes wrong, let's return response. We already returning here. Let's return response.redirect, maybe to /user/login. Okay. Then, if we do not have a user ID on the session, which basically means that the session did not get authenticated, right? If you remember here in the Authenticate session, we assigned a user ID to a user_ID key on our session object. So let's go back here. If our user is not authenticated, oops, this is what this happened here. Okay, this closes this, and I need to close the queue. Okay, return response.redirect /user/login. And actually, if this so, but if everything goes right, we want to return a next. So here, basically, if we do not have the session, so this is like a technical check for us, this shouldn't happen. But then if we do not have a user ID, which means that the session is not authenticated, we want to redirect our user to the /user/login route so that they are first to log in. And the second function will be check not authenticated. So to some routes, for example, the login and register routes, if a user is already authenticated, so if they have logged in, we do not want to let them access it for the second time because it's just simply not necessary for them to be accessing this route. So what we want to do is we want to return request response next, so a standard middleware function that takes these three arguments. And once again, we want to have the same check as we had above. So I just paste it here. And this time, if the user is logged in, so if request.session.user_ID exists, we want to return response.redirect, and we want here use the redirect route. So here we are utilizing something called a closure, which means that the function we are defining right here, the middleware function, which will be the middleware function if we call the check not authenticated function, has an access to the redirect route argument of this function. And this is how we can create middleware functions, but not only middleware functions. In this case, this is a middleware function, but all kinds of functions with parameters, right? So this is actually the check not authenticated function and check authenticated function, although this does not really take any parameters. But check not authenticated takes parameters, and then based on this parameter, it will create a different function to return us a different function. Okay, so here the redirect route, and the redirect route can be different things. In our case, this will be just /todos. Okay, so now let's go back to our users routes and let's import these. So let's say const check authenticated, check not authenticated equals require, and what we will require is / to get out of the folder. Help. Let's mouse over if they've been found. No. And they have not been found because we did not export them. So module exports, check authenticated and check not authenticated. Let's go back to our users, and now they are yellow, which means that they have been found. That's great. Okay, so now let's think about which of our routes should be protected and in which form. So if you go to the register route, right, you should not be probably authenticated. Therefore, check not authenticated. So if you are authenticated, you will be redirected to a /todos route. Okay, the same goes for our post route. So if you are authenticated, you do not have any need to post to create a new user. If you are already logged in, you do not need to log in once again. So therefore, get and post login routes also get this. But you can log out. So actually, logout to log out, you actually want to be authenticated. Therefore, we say check authenticated. And I call these functions because if you remember, these functions return us a function. So if they are called, this means that here there will be a function returned. So if I created this, if the check authenticated functions were just simple functions, I would not call them here. I would just say, okay, check authenticated, right? If the check authenticated in itself would be a middleware, but it's not a middleware, it just returns a middleware function. Okay, let's now grab the very same thing. Let's go to our todos route, because our todos route we also want to protect. And we want to, if you are not logged in, you cannot see our to-dos, or you cannot see the main page. What you also cannot see or cannot do is you cannot add a new to-do. Therefore, we also protect the post route. You cannot change it. You cannot delete it for sure. And this means that we have not used the check not authenticated. Therefore, let's delete it. Okay, that's good. We need to do one more thing. Currently, if you take a look here in our to-dos, the fact that we are showing only all the to-dos for all the users, from all the users, is not that good of a thing, but it's even worse because people can modify all the to-dos. Therefore, what we need to do now is we need to go ahead and we need to add a user ID also to all these queries. So actually, let's here make a small refactor. Let's make it the way we always do it. So we want to select ID text and done from todos. However, now we want to add a where clause. So where user ID equals $1. And the where clause. So here we usually have a tab sign, and here let's say request.session.user_ID. And this check authenticated function, right, will also ensure that we have the session object. Because if you remember there, we had these if statements that basically will return us an error if we don't have the session object. Therefore, here we can safely use it. Okay, so this is good. Here it will return only the to-dos for one user. Now let's go ahead further. So on the insert, we do not actually can't actually change it so simple. But what we have to do is we have to say user_ID, and here we need to say $3 $2 here and $3 here. And what we need to do here is we need to say request.session.user_ID. This also means that we need to add this user ID column to our to-dos table, but we'll do that shortly. Let's just finish right here, because then we'll forget about it. And user ID equals $2, and the $2 is our request.session.user_ID. So here, of course, you don't want a different user modifying somebody else's to-dos. And you have to remember kind of that it's not only possible to interact with this data with the database just using this HTML application, right? People just can go in, for example, to the inspect tab, and then you can very easily replicate the calls, changing parameters and change routes. So here you just have to protect your data, your users. And of course, we don't want anyone else be able to delete our to-dos. Okay, that's good. So now what we've done is we should be able, or we should see only our current to-dos. But I think if I log in right now, I will actually and we actually did not get logged in, which is caused by the fact that we have modified our session function here, and we are using the get session. However, if the session exists, however, here, if you remember in the auth, we are checking for a user ID. And what we don't have is here on the get session, we did not return the user ID, which is not very nice. And therefore, now you can see why it's necessary to have working tests for your previous functionalities. And we'll focus on the test for application, because now, if as we introduced or all the enforced login routes, this test will fail, or at least some of them will fail. We'll work on them in the next episode. Currently, let's check if our login works. And you're able to log in. Fantastic. That's very good. So we have a login functionality, right? By the way, if you still have the basic or here, if you take a look, we have 5 seconds, right? So I think I already refreshed the application with more than 5 seconds. So basically what you want to do is you don't want to have 5 seconds, but that's maybe I will set it to 5 seconds. Let's see what will happen here. You have to reload the application where you change the env files. Okay, so here if I press F5, right, I'm still here. So let's go maybe to /user/login. All right, oh, I can't. That's also our redirection. So that's our redirection working. Let's go to application. Let's remove this. Currently, we should be redirected to a user login. Let's say test. Let's go in here. Let's try to, because currently our cookie or our session should be created with only 5 seconds of validity. And if when I refreshed, I was logged out. So great, that works, but you don't want to have it set for 5 seconds. You want to have it a little bit longer. Okay, let's say 600 seconds. Test. Okay, and here I should not be logged out anymore. Okay, however, exactly, logged out. We now have a possibility for us to log in, and if you saw, in order to log out, I needed to manually go ahead and delete the cookie so that new session is created. This is not what we want to do. We want to give our users the possibility to log out. Therefore, we go to our todos. To our todos. So basically, we already have a route for this. Not this one. This one. We already have a route for this. However, what we don't have is a nice button that would allow our users to do so. Therefore, let's go to our index.ejs file. Let's create a form. So here underneath the h1, let's create a form. And this form will have an action. Oops, action equals. And the action will be user/logout. And now let's use the method override. So a query string and underscore method equals delete. Okay, and the real method will be a post method. Okay, and inside this form we'll have a button that will say logout, and that will have a class of a button add. Okay, let's refresh it here. Let's log in. And there is our logout button, but it's a pretty weird place. I would like to move it up here. Therefore, let's go to our CSS file. In the CSS file, what we want to do is we want to find our header of a card, and we want to change that a little bit. So currently, our card header does a little bit too many things to my liking. Let's create a card. Let's modify the card header class. So what we want to do, the card header to be, is we want to have a display of flex with a flex direction of row with justify content space between so that they are spread out evenly nice, and we want to have it width of 100%. Okay, and therefore this, for now, we will remove. Let's see. And our button is where it should be. For my liking, currently it's a little bit too... it has too little height. So let's see button logout. Height and 21 pixels. 21 pixels. This is the height of the add button here. Let's go to our login and let's give it a class. Where's our button? No, not login. To our index, and let's give it a class of button logout. To refresh it, it has become a little bit wider. And that's it. This is our application. Let's maybe quickly see if it works. Okay, I was logged out. And now we can see here that we have a small issue with the title of our login and register. Therefore, let's go here. Let's create something called card title. And in the card title, what we'll do is we'll set the font weight to bold. We'll set some margin on the bottom, let's say 0.6 area. And let's maybe say align self baseline. Okay. And let's apply this card title to our register. So here it will not have a class of a header, it will have a card title, and it will also have a card title. Therefore, now it's good. Okay. It's a little bit smaller than our main title, but that's also good. So now we have implemented successfully login and register functionalities to our application. And in the next video, what we will do is we'll add the test cases for all the functionality that we have currently created. And that will be a wrap, in my opinion, of the version of our application that is 100% working and it has all the features that it should have. What I still have planned in terms of videos in this series is a video where we set up the HTTPS for our production version of the application. And this is what we will definitely do. So we still have 2 videos to go at least for this series, and then we'll see. There are still some features you could implement. We could maybe redesign the UI of this application to be a little bit more fancy. We could maybe add, for example, something like a search button. This will also be a popular feature, but we will see what happens, or maybe we begin some new series. But for now, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.